Are you struggling to find the right professional talent for your project? Are you working with a limited budget?
We are so excited about our next sponsor, Casting Networks. I have personally used Casting Networks to release a number of projects for free to the industry's largest network of professional performers for my commercial work and for my very first short film, Strange Thing.
Creators can manage submissions, schedule auditions, request and review self-tapes, and book top talent for their projects, all in one place. All for free.
On Casting Networks, you can create an account and send your casting call to thousands of professional talent. So join Casting Networks, the industry's preferred casting platform where more than 1.2 million performers have scheduled over 14 million auditions. That's a lot of auditions. Visit www.castingnetworks.com/movies to create an account for free today. You know, making movies is hard.
Making movies is hard.
Welcome. This is the podcast about the struggle of being an independent filmmaker. I'm Mark Bassell, the founding host of the podcast, and I'm a sci-fi horror filmmaker. And my first feature film, The Alternate, will be coming out on September 13th.
Yay! I'm Liz Manish. I'm a writer, director, producer who has made 2 features, Speed of Life and Bread and Butter. And I'm currently in development on 376 more. I'm a distribution consultant who used to manage Sundance's creative distribution initiative, and I do sales.
This week, we welcome producer, writer, and director Mikail Chowdhury onto the show to talk about his short film, Amy Victoria, the series The Myth of Control, and his process as a writer and a producer. We also talk about an article discussing how digital creators are uncertain about pushing into Hollywood because they don't want to lose creative control of their projects. And Liz and I talk about what we do when we hit a brick wall on a project. But first, Liz, how are you doing today?
We have COVID. I mean, I don't have COVID, but my son and my husband have COVID, and we all live in the same small square footage. So I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for the COVID to hit me. I've had 2 negative tests so far, and everyone else has positive tests, and I have no symptoms, but the COVID is here. The COVID has finally reached our house.
Wow. Do they have symptoms of any kind?
They do. They both have symptoms. It's not horrific. It's lethargy and fever. And my son's fever went down today on day technically 3. And then Sean's just tired and a little congested. But it's just weird because I'm the one who gets everyone sick usually, right? And so now I'm the one who's not sick. So I'm thinking either it's going to hit like a brick wall like any second, or I've like won a lottery ticket in the COVID world.
You have COVID lottery ticket.
Possibly.
So you're just free.
Yeah. You haven't had it yet, right? Like you're still holding out. So we've fallen. We're a domino that has fallen. But
yeah, I'm one of the few people I know who hasn't had it.
Yeah. I used to be that person, just so you know. It used to be me already.
Besides family members who will never get tested, so we will not know if they will have it or not.
I'm so sorry about that.
Anyways, moving on. Much love to them anyways. You know, much love to anyone. You know, it's just, that's however you want to do your thing. It's all good. I support it as long as you support me the way I want to live my life. But yeah, I don't know what else is going on. Anything, you know, I mean, COVID, yeah, that's a terrible thing, big deal. But yeah, what else is going on? There's gotta be something on the movie side. What's happening? The
only other thing is that, you know, Amy and I had our regular, we had 2 meetings a week usually, and we had our meeting. I still managed to produce pages last night, and we still managed to meet today. It was like half call and show and tell with Amy over Zoom, showing her, look at this shell we found on the ground yesterday, I mean, anytime. Look at this. You know, it was basically him telling Amy about 15 million things. And then as soon as he walked away, I'd go, okay, what scene am I writing tomorrow, Amy? And she'd go, oh, let's do the fortune teller scene. And then he'd come back and be like, look at this candle, Amy. So still managed to get stuff done in the midst of the COVID. And so that I think is noteworthy in of itself.
That's very sweet. Look at this candle. Yeah, that's cool.
You tell me.
Know what I'm doing?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know. Drowning in work. Yeah. Drowning in work in more ways than one, I should say, I suppose. I had to work from the office for the first time ever last week. Did I talk about this?
Well, you were at the office when we recorded the show.
Oh, right. Yeah. So we could talk about it. It was okay. It was fine. It was great. I mean, there were great parts about it, I would have to say, because I got to see people in person. Especially one day I saw one person, one human, which was nice. The second day, I think I saw 3 humans. It was a lot of humans. It was more than I was expecting. And you know, some people I haven't seen more than like a couple times ever. So it was cool to like, you know, just have some moments to chat with people. But yeah, I have a couple things to talk about. It's funny. It's like I hadn't really been thinking. I started doing this, I think, before last week, but I didn't think of it as being important. But I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, and it's not been fruitful so far, really. But so here's what I'm doing. I'm going on to LinkedIn and I type in talent agent or talent manager genre, you know, maybe. And then I just see how many people pop up in my seconds or firsts, you know, and then I just go through that list and then I look at that person on LinkedIn. I type their name into IMDb Pro and I see who their client list is. So I see like what kind of clients they have. Are they managing writers? Are they managing directors? Are they doing actors only? Are they people similar to me, different than me, more experienced, less experienced? And then based on that, then I'll friend them. If I feel like if they're like people who are like, okay, you know, someone that I would actually be a good fit for or a good match. And then if they accept my friendship, which only 2 have, I think so far, then I write them a little message about who I am and, you know, why I friended them and how I thought we might be a good fit for each other.
Oh.
So that's what I've been doing. It's interesting. It's like I'm learning a lot about like the kinds of people who have managers or agents, because it's actually people who I wouldn't expect necessarily to have managers or agents. There's a lot of people who like never made a feature before, just made short films, just maybe don't even have any credits to their name on IMDb even. Like they just have like, are writing this thing that's in development, you know? And so it was kind of interesting, like to see like that people who have done far less than I have are being represented by professionals in the industry to get work. And then, you know, there's people like us who have done lots of things and don't have any kind of management whatsoever.
But again, like it's not a meritocracy, right? So it's like your experience means nothing. It's like, do you have the flavor of the month script that they're interested in, or the idea that they think is super sexy or whatever?
Are you their cousin's daughter? Right. Are you their cousin's friend who makes movies, right, who got connected? I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little bit too, whatever, cynical.
You are. I think you're being accurate. Do not worry about that.
But so that's been a fun process to just sort of see what's going on there. And then the other thing I've been doing is I just been like friending people on LinkedIn who like want to be my friend, and then just talk to them. Like, so that one person was like a writer in Australia, and I was like, well, what scripts do you write? Do you have anything in the sci-fi, you know, horror genres that you are looking to get made or whatever? And she was like, oh no, but like I have a lot of writer friends. Like, can I reach out to my writer friends and let them know what you're looking for? And I was like, sure, that would be great. And then I got 2 scripts sent to me. So one, it was a half send. One was like, we talked a bunch and then he was like, yeah, well, you know, I don't do anything on the spec anymore. So if you want to option my script, you have to pay for it. So if you want to read it still, let me know. And so I haven't decided if I want to spend the time to read it, if I have to pay for it. Liz is shaking her head and don't.
Well, I was thinking about how I recently had a meeting with a writer who approached me on Twitter, and he sent me like 6 scripts because he said, here are log lines for all the projects and here are reasons why you should read them. And I was like, oh, well, these few sound great, but you know, be warned, I really take a long time to read, and I'm going to stop if I don't think it's interesting. And he said, that's fine. And then when I met with him, he like watched maybe one trailer of one of my movies, and like that was it. And I'm hearing like this guy that you're talking to in Australia, and I'm thinking like, where's the two-way street here? Like, he's just there. He's like this enticing, like he sees himself as this like enticing opportunity for you, but he's not doing any due diligence on you, and there's no effort to collaborate.
I think he watched a couple of the shorts, and I think he watched the trailer for the alternate, and he said it looks good. He's also a director too. You know, he's like directed his own movies.
Oh, so if that's maybe his focus, then he's not.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he just doesn't feel like he feels like his work is worth a certain amount of money, or like or any his kind of money. Is. And that he just doesn't feel like he's at the stage where he wants to collaborate in that way. To me, it seems like, well, if you've got a script and then you have a director who could be potentially interested in making it, like, why wouldn't you want to collaborate with that person? Because if they do get the movie made, you're going to get paid, right? So it's like, to no risk.
Yeah.
thing for you to do.
Unless he's actively pursuing opportunities with that script at this moment, which it sounds like he's not.
I don't know. Maybe he's pursuing it in the way that like, oh, this guy wants to read it. I'll tell him that it's, I have to pay it. You have to pay for it.
Right.
Because it was funny because we both did like a list of like, here's what I'm looking for and here's what I'm looking for. And I was like, oh, this totally matches up. And I think he even said on spec in one of his things. I was like, oh, spec. Perfect. Me too. That's what I want to do. Things on spec. And then at the end, him for him to say, oh, I don't, if you're not going to pay for it, you can't do anything. But like, he's like, do you still want to read it? It's like, well,
no,
it's not an enticing offer to want to read your script. If you're telling me that you're not going to give it away, there's no chance of collaboration that you have, like, I have to pay you for it. It's like, maybe there's 1,000 other scripts that are better to read than that one.
But I think, we can talk about this later, or we can, it doesn't have to be a whole conversation. But the reason I brought up the scenario that I was in recently is like, writers are even more powerless than directors. And I think, this is maybe a certain unique situation that you find yourself in. But I think a lot of writers could really benefit from seeking out directors and forming partnerships rather than waiting for the system to pick them up, just like directors. Like this idea of like, maybe a lot of writers see the directors as like an enemy that's going to take advantage of them in some way. But it's like, we're being fucked over just as much as writers are. So it's like, if we join forces and then produce the work together. I'm working with 2 writers on 2 projects, and they work their ass off on these projects that we do together. So I'm just thinking about, I don't know, this idea of like looking at you as a barrier rather than an opportunity is very annoying to me. I'm annoyed by this.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it wasn't annoying to me. It was more like, oh, well, you could have just said that from the very beginning email, and then we wouldn't have to have all this back and forth, But maybe he was deciding whether or not that was his stance. Yeah, I don't know.
Or just playing tough, hard to get.
Yeah, but I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is what you're saying, but like that there's so hard for all of us, right? So like we should be partnering, we should be working together, we should be not expecting someone to pay the other one, like we should just be in it together. And then if the movie does get made, if financing does come into place, then we all get a fee, that's written into the budget. So like that should be the way it works. And I feel like writers still hold on to this idea that like they are going to get paid for their work. They wrote it, they'll get paid. And it's like, well, maybe you will.
No one's getting paid.
But no one else is getting paid. So it's kind of unreasonable to think that you will get paid if no one else is getting paid.
Write things that make your heart sing, write things that are meaningful to you, and then you'll get value from the experience of it being made. Like that is all I'm thinking about right now, is like never have expectations of being paid. Unfortunately, it's horrible. It's a horrible system we're in.
Like I do want to hear more about like your process for working with writers and how you find writers. And, like this writer on Twitter, for instance, like, like will you ever read their script now, or is it just done?
The writers that I met on Twitter?
Yeah.
I read like parts of like 6 scripts.
Oh, you read parts of all the scripts?
Yeah, I think that's also what made me resentful. It's like, dude, I like really never do this for anyone.
and he had just watched a trailer of one of your movies.
Yeah, it's just like some person to him. And I just kept thinking, this is not how I want to have a collaboration at all.
Yeah, like what's your expectation then? That they would like watch, like a whole movie or something? Or
I just maybe they've been fucked over so many times that they're not going to put a time investment in, but like asking someone to read any script is hours of work. My expectation was maybe read my bio. I don't know. Go to my website, pretend like you know anything about me. That's what I want. I want someone to just pretend.
Just pretend. Yeah, I guess I don't know what I expect. Like, it'd be nice if they watch my movie, if someone approached me for anything, but like, I'm not really expecting them to. I guess also at this stage because it's not available anywhere really, so it's like, it's not really easy for them. But yeah, it's nice if they checked out some of the shorts or whatever. But, I get it. Like, no one has a lot of time. But I think you can be like, I guess what I'm trying to boil down to is like, you can be inspired to want to work with somebody without having watched all their work. Like, there could be things about like, it could be a trailer, it could be your website, it could just be like something they saw of you, something you said on Twitter that they were inspired by. Like, there could be all kinds of things that could make someone want to work with you. So I'm not necessarily going to say like, if they didn't watch like all my work, like I'm not going to be like, how dare you?
But there needs to be equality in common. Like, I think it's like,
Yeah.
like Natalie Higdon, her script told me now it's like there's a David Bowie character in it. And it's like, oh, well, I can look there. The narrative writes itself. And
Right.
and Josh and I from Thin Blue Veins, like, I think we like very heartfelt content in the genre world. So there's something there. Like, I can argue a common bond, but it's the weird, like, random reach out. Like, it's great that you're doing what you're doing via LinkedIn and you're explaining the common bond. That's all we need. Just like
Yeah.
do a tiny bit of research.
Right, exactly. Well, see, I'll let you know if it, is fruitful at all. But what is fruitful is to check out our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/MMIH podcast, the way the show continues to live. So if you like the words that we're saying every week and the guests that we have on the show and the things that we do on this podcast, $1, $2 a month makes a huge difference. So go over and check it out. And then, and you get to get some behind the scenes. You get to hear our rambling with our producer Eric on our weekly meetings. Every week there's a new video posted to the Patreon. That's a exclusive behind the scenes look at the making of the show. So, that's one of the many, many bonuses you'll get if you're a Patreon patron. You also don't forget to check out Jambox.io. They're a new royalty-free music and sound effects company with an emphasis on high quality cinematic cues. They also have customized plans to fit your needs, which is pretty awesome. So check them out today. You also get a discount, 20% off of your subscription with the code MMIH. So go over there and subscribe and use MMIH today. But without any more further delay, here's our chat with Mikail Chowdhury. Mikail, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today. Give us the elevator pitch for Amy Victoria.
No problem. Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me on. Really appreciate you for letting me join you. Amy Victoria is a short film, a queer deaf love story about two profoundly deaf women of color who are kept apart on their anniversary, and they are forced to sort of face some of their own vulnerabilities or insecurities in order to reconcile at the end of it.
How many days did you shoot?
2.5.
And what was the rough budget, if you can say?
I can say it was approximately $2,000.
Wow.
If you could fold in two questions into one, that is my preference here. So we want to know how you came up with the idea, but I also know that this short is tied to The Myth of Control, which is an episodic project. So if there's a way where you can kind of answer both, that would be great.
Absolutely. So back when the lockdown happened, March 2020, then I'd been developing a feature film and I had funding for it, and I just had an audience table read and it was all going great. And that happened last Saturday before lockdown happened. So there was a group of about 30 people who would never forgive me for robbing them of their last Saturday night of freedom to listen to my second draft screenplay being performed by some wonderful actors, but nonetheless, it was a second draft version of my screenplay. So after that happened and a week of sitting around feeling forlorn about life and the world, then I decided we'd just go and start making something. So I sent an email out to a few people, including Sana Soni, who's been a guest on your show previously, which was titled Bonkers Idea, I think it was. And I was based in DC at the time, so I reached out to these people and I said, guys, what if we just try to make something during this time and do it remotely and find a way to shoot it? And to my surprise, everyone came back and said, yes, we're doing nothing at all. Can we please do it? So that developed into a web series or a short form series called The Myth of Control. Myth of Control was 7 episodes, each episode 10 minutes long, or under 10 minutes, to be fair, somewhat shorter. And it was conceived, completed, shot, created entirely remotely during that lockdown period in 2020. We went from concept to locked scripts within about 3 weeks. So it was very quick. Everything had to be done virtually as we're going through. We found a way to shoot things. So out of that series, there was an episode called Amy Victoria, which was the third episode. That was one which featured these two deaf women. And one of the characters, Amy, is a kind of lead character through the series. But in that episode, it's quite a self-contained story of those two women. So when we came to marketing the series and looking how to develop it, we thought, well, if we can cut an episode as a short film, that'll actually help us to get more traction probably in terms of being able to pitch and sell it, because festival circuits tend to prefer a short to a web series. Amy Victoria lent itself to that. And also it was one of the favorites amongst a lot of people that have watched the series. So we re-edited edited it as best we could to turn it into a self-contained story. And that's how it developed. In terms of the question of how I came up with the concept for it, the concept for the series was about 6 friends who were all experiencing the same day of their lives. And you see each episode focusing on a different character experiencing the same day. And they're all connected through this joint video call that sort of culminates in a thing. And there are various stories in there, some of intrigue, some sort of romance, some a bit more comedy, some are darker, some are lighter. The Amy Victoria story developed because I wanted to do a story that was just a love story, just a very pure kind of romantic, just nice love story, a romantic drama. And everyone asked me why were the characters deaf? And the honest truth is that I didn't really decide. I didn't sit there and say, I'm going to make up a deaf character or a deaf story. It sounds pretentious, but they just kind of were. Like the character of Amy, who was created first, came out when I was thinking about the different characters and thinking about the different people and having to do this on my own, obviously very, very quickly on the fly. Then it occurred to me that you don't see deaf characters in situations where, unless they have to be deaf for a specific plot-based reason. And I didn't see any reason why that should be the case. So she was deaf, and then it made logical sense that Victoria would also be deaf. The fact that Victoria is also a woman, again, they just were. That one was really just, I didn't really put any thought into that at all. It just sort of happened and developed. And then having created the basic story to it, the concept of the arc and where it sort of started and ended, then we had the brilliant writer, Hannah Harmison, who came in, and she works with the deaf community, has a lot of deaf friends. She also knows American Sign Language. So she was able to bring in and write this really beautiful story to it, a great script, and bring in all those elements. So that's how it was conceived initially. That's how it was sort of developed.
And how long did you spend working on the film from like the idea to release?
So we had a few, if you account for the gaps in between where we were, say, shooting other bits or we're moving equipment around, but it was a few months in total. That's all. So it wasn't very long. We didn't have a lot of time. And I just want to be very clear. We were all horribly naive because in 2020, going back to 2020, when we were all spraying bleach on our groceries in our doorsteps and things, we all thought, things are going to go back to normal by October. So we just figured we've got to get this done quickly and really fast while everyone's still free. So we did. And then a year later happened, and then another year later happened.
Compared to all the other projects you've done, how difficult was this one?
This is the single hardest project I've ever done, unquestionably. When I say that we shot remotely, and the reason the budget was so low is because we shot it on an iPhone. To be fair, we shot it on my wife's iPhone, which is why we didn't have to pay for the camera. And my wife allowed us to clear her iPhone completely. Put the filmic, she's a wonderful woman. So I keep thanking it any time I get interviewed or talked about this. She let us clear her iPhone. We put the Filmic Pro app on there, which is an app which kind of unlocks the camera settings on your phone effectively, allows you to turn it into a better video camera. It's the app that, Soderbergh used for High Flying Bird and the Duplass brothers used for Tangerine. And then we sent that along with 2 pretty cheap softbox lights from Amazon, a very good microphone, I might add, because we wanted to get sound in there somewhere, and a couple of tripods. We packaged it up and sent it to each actor in turn. They would put it in the trunk of an Uber or a Lyft without having to contact with the driver, because the driver just popped the trunk. They sanitized it, put it in the back of the trunk. They would drive to the next person in LA, pop the trunk, they'd take it out, re-sanitize just to be safe, shoot with it, put it in the trunk, go on and so forth. And that's how we did the equipment. And we had to coordinate, obviously, the logistics of all of that, the timings of everyone doing it. I mean, we had to go back to how would we even shoot this thing, because we didn't know how to shoot remotely. What we didn't want to do, and there's nothing wrong at all with shooting a film on Zoom, as many people have done very imaginatively and brilliantly, but we wanted to shoot something as if that didn't look like we had shot it remotely, as if we had just shot it in a normal way. So to do that, we had to have some level of camera work on it. We had to be able to have, pans, tilts, movement. You had to do some handheld stuff, things like that. And so all of that had to be conceived. We got to work with a wonderful cinematographer that gave us a lot of his advice. He's an Oscar nominated guy, and he gave us a ton of time to talk through what could we use. That's how we settled on the phone, because we knew we were putting it in the hands of someone in the quarantine bubble of the actor who had never been on set in their lives, so people are comfortable with the phone. We put together our own PDF guides of how to set up the equipment, how to shoot. We gave all this guidance notes, things, a little video we did for everybody and set it around. And then on the day, everyone had to join a video call. The director was directing, director Christy Farris. Christy Farris was her directorial debut, in fact. It's her first film that she ever did. She's a very well-known actor. She's been in Scrubs, Goliath, in Monogamy, multiple shows over the years, very recognizable. She never directed a film before. And so she had to direct over video to these actors who were deaf, and she doesn't know American Sign Language. And so we used Google Meet at the time, was the first of these apps that had a mechanism for live voice recognition closed captioning. So we would speak slowly and the captions would come up on the screen. The actors would read them and then they would understand what to do. And if they were comfortable speaking using their voice, they would do that. And if not, they would type in the chat box back to us to do it. So that's how we shot our film. So it was without a doubt the most challenging, but it was also the most rewarding and probably the most fun, because everybody, when you're doing something so completely insane as this, and it really, making any film is an act of lunacy, really. But this was the next level. Everybody had such good humor about it. Everyone was just so patient, so happy to be part of it and doing it. It was a brilliant atmosphere. So definitely the hardest, but also the most fulfilling.
I have a couple questions. First off, how did you find your deaf talent? What was that process like?
Yeah, that was the easiest part of the entire film. And it really is this big thing. When I said the character's going to be deaf, I had a bunch of people say to me, okay, but how are you going to, and I said, we're going to cast deaf actors. There's no way we're not doing that, deaf actors. Everybody said, but how are you going to find them? Well, what if you can't? And I was just like, we will. I'm confident we will. And we had two characters who are both deaf women of color. We reached out to a talent agent who is very well known for representing disabled performers. They had a fantastic roster of deaf actresses. We went through and we made offers to Natasha Offaly and Stephanie Nogueras, and they both very kindly accepted it. And bearing in mind, we were approaching them saying, hey, can we pay you to shoot yourselves on an iPhone in your own home using your own wardrobe, and also someone who you're living with is going to have to operate the camera. And they both said yes. And both of them, just to be clear to everyone, Natasha and Stephanie are both very well-established, accomplished actors. Natasha has been on Netflix Politician. She's been in Marvel, the Marvel Universe. She's in The Game, Spider-Man, Miles Morales. Stephanie Nogueras is crushing it right now. Not only she's been on things like Grimm and The Good Fight, she's now one of the leads on Killing It, which is a new show from the guys behind Brooklyn Nine-Nine. These are people who are very seasoned and very talented and experienced. It was really easy to get that talent. When people ever go and say, we couldn't, or it's too hard to find, say, talent who are, whatever it is, whether it's disabled or whether it's a particular minority backgrounds or something, it's not true. You're not looking hard enough, to be quite honest with you. So that was the easiest piece of the entire thing.
Going back to the funding piece, though, when you were ready to go, were you ready to go for a completely different film? And did you convince your investors to put money into this? Or was this entirely put together through a crowdsourced budget amongst all of the crew?
Yeah, it's a good question. No, I didn't resource the funding because that funding was for a very different kind of project. That was very much for a feature film. So we didn't want to repurpose it for that. We actually did have, I'll be honest, if we had waited about 3 to 4 months, we actually had funding offer from a smaller body who they are one of the platforms that arose to try and do short form content for a time. So they had an offer. It would have been great, but we would have had to wait several months to go and get that. In retrospect, I think we definitely made the right decision, because had we waited, we would have had a bit more money to work with. But at the same time, we would have lost the momentum, that energy that we had. And really, to pull off something as crazy as this, we just needed that kind of energy and momentum to it. So yeah, we basically funded amongst a number of the producers, and that's how we put it together. But it was a lot of people on this. Obviously, for that budget, there were people involved who didn't take their day rate, who did things very, very generously for us. And part of it was nobody was working at the time because everything was so shut down. But nonetheless, it was very generous of them to do so, because not everybody was willing to do that. I think it was a really lucky stroke for us that we just found some brilliantly talented people that were willing to not only just come in and do it, but really commit themselves to this.
So what happened to the money for the other feature? Did that just disappear completely? Like the deal's done, or are you still have that kind of line open to make the movie later? Like talk to us about like what happened and why it happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So that money was, and yes, the line is still open. In fact, I had a call today with the investor. In fact, we've been talking a lot. He's a very nice guy. He's a good bloke. I met him through other channels. He's still very interested. We were talking about the projects and developing, and he said to me, his exact words were, "So what are we doing with that script that I love?" So yes, that is very much still there on the cards. I'm hoping to make that film in the next 2 years and to get back onto that. So that's very much there. I mean, what happened with that, though, as you very sensibly ask, is so he was investing development funding for it, and he was also on board to produce and bring in extra investors. And we had 2 events lined up to have meetings with those investors, to also include sharing samples of things with them to do so. That all obviously went out the window when COVID struck. Now, the way I shoot films is I will not shoot a frame or not spend a dime until I've got all the money I need to make the entire film from start to finish, including completion. There's nothing wrong with doing it differently. I know plenty of indie producers that do it differently. They will get enough money to get the ball rolling, and they'll write the script, and they'll get the money in to shoot it, then they'll crowdsource, the editing. But that's not how I work. So with that, the money went back because I said, we're not ready to do it. So I handed it back off because I wasn't prepared to sit on it just for a period of time and then be in an awkward situation.
I'm just thinking about, it's March 2020 and you're like, fuck it, let's make a movie, which is great. But I think the presumption is you didn't know how long, none of us knew how long this was going to be. So now looking back on it, you're pitching pandemic created content. So I want to get under the hood of like, did you do it to be a commercial product? And I understand you shot it to not be a Zoom movie, but it still has the limitations of something that possibly was made under this like very exciting duress. So I'm just curious how that translates to pitching right now and the response to the film. Like, are people seeing it as pandemic content? Are you trying to be really quiet about that? What are you going to do with it? What's the ideal?
Yeah, really good point. So when we created it, we made it pandemic adjacent. The only time there's a reference to anything like a pandemic are a couple of very throwaway references, which are purely because we needed a reason why the characters never meet in the same space at the same time. That's the only reason why. We very specifically wanted to make sure this was not about the pandemic or about that. It's about these characters who happen to be going through a really crap time at that period of time. So that was the goal. And to a large extent, we managed to achieve that. There's, you see a little references to things here and there, but it's not about it. And in terms of pitching it subsequently, I think now that was definitely the right call to make. And then again, it's interesting you say it because there's no filmmaking, as you guys know, is all about choices. There's not necessarily a right or wrong. You have to make a call at the time, and you hope that in hindsight you'll look back and go, yes, that was the right one to make. There were people that we were working with who were lobbying us to try and say, well, no, we should make it really about the pandemic. It should be really all about this and stuff. And we went the other way, and I think it was the right decision. So in terms of pitching this, it's actually gone very well. We're looking at developing Amy Victoria as a feature at the moment. I'm actually starting work on the script at the moment, along with Hannah, one of the original writers, and another writer. And we're hoping to bring on, or we will be bringing on, in fact, a deaf writer, and I'm already working with a deaf producer over in the States as well around it. So that's working. It's very different in the sense that they do share the same space. It's not set in the pandemic at all. It's very much, as if it never happened in the universe that we're creating for that.
So when you're making the show, I guess I haven't seen it, so maybe this is a silly question, but does it look like it's a Zoom conversation, or like what are the shots and the angles in the movie? And like, was the purpose of it to like have a better quality camera that you could control and like get actually like a better footage, but then just have it kind of replicate a Zoom angle? Or was it more like that you were giving them a shot list to like knock out like while they were shooting their segments? Like could you just talk through like what the purpose of the iPhone was and how it worked?
Absolutely. The film does not at all look like a Zoom because it's not set as a Zoom. So you imagine you're just watching a film where you've got angles, you've got wide, you've got close up, you've got pan. I mean, the film starts with a panning shot that literally swings round from, a close-up of a clock to one of the characters lying on a bed and goes in there. You have POV shots, you have over the shoulder, all of that. The end of the film is a balcony scene where you have one of them outside looking up at the other, and they're signing to each other from one balcony down to the roof. And then there's a later scene where they swap around. The other one has approached them, is signing up to the window. So it very much is shot exactly like a normal film. There's no reference to zoom or anything in it whatsoever, which was the goal that we had. And one of the great compliments we had actually was that someone in post-production who didn't know what we shot it on, they actually asked us, they told us later they had assumed it was shot on a DSLR because they were so surprised that we shot it on a phone. So we felt that like we did a really good job. We managed to make it look really good. We were guiding everything from the setups, the shot list, to the ISO, to everything all remotely.
Let's take a step back, because I think we weren't even planning on talking about the myth and control to this extent. I think we were just like, let's talk to Mikail. Let's just learn about him. And, looking at your CV, you have this feature you made around 2002, and then you have like a lot of shorts. And then I think you're building up to more features. I'm just curious, like, was that by design? We often talk about the value of short form and whether it really grows a career or whether it's a distraction, or we'd just love to have a more frank discussion about going from features to shorts.
Absolutely, yes. I'll be completely frank. I wasn't planning on making any shorts in the last couple of years. Purely the pandemic is what pushed that. I started off actually in music when I was a kid, and then I went and did a law degree because my background is I'm mixed race. I'm Bangladeshi, Mexican, and British. And I was born in Bangladesh, and I was a migrant over to the UK, but I grew up effectively as a second-generation immigrant. As any good second-generation immigrant, I was very clearly told that there were 4 professions that were acceptable for you to get into, and the arts and filmmaking were definitely not one of them. So I went, while I was doing my law degree, I sort of fell in with the theatre crowd. I started off doing that, sort of acting, doing improv, and then doing some actual proper acting, and then directing plays, and then writing. And the first full play that I wrote, we premiered it at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival at the time. It got some accolades in the press, so I decided to shoot it as a feature. And I had no clue whatsoever what I was doing. And as you said, it was 2002, and we didn't have the internet in the capacity that you do now. So you couldn't YouTube everything, you couldn't Google this stuff. I had basically no idea what I was doing. I managed to blag 500 quid, which is about maybe $800 from the local council. Then I borrowed a mate's flat and cast a bunch of students, some of whom I knew, some of whom I didn't know, but they seemed to be able to do the roles well. And it was a big ensemble sort of film with lots of different characters and stuff based on the play. And long story short, I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily argue it was particularly good, but it was good enough to get into a couple of film festivals, or a film festival in the States. So I got a screening in LA, screening in New York, and I made some contacts there. But making that film, when you have no idea, it's one of the best things to do is to just make stuff when you have no clue what you're doing, because then you have no idea that you're getting it wrong. And as long as there's no one around to tell you you're doing it wrong, then it doesn't really matter, because you'll just keep going and you'll get it done. So we shot this thing, and we had crazy stuff, like we're lighting it with lamps because we couldn't afford proper lights. And someone had heard that if you have like parchment paper and tape that over the top of the lamp, it helps to diffuse the light. So you've got all these hungover students waiting for their scene, holding up lamps with like parchment paper. No idea if it made any difference for the shot. And when I edited it, again, we didn't have any money. And there's no film school in Dundee where I went to university. So my mate was an animation student at the art college, and he gave me the code to get into the editing suites in the basement. And I would sneak down at like 5 a.m. when they opened the doors, work until 9, then leave during classes, then come back at like 5 and work till 10 or 11 or whatever time they closed, and sneak out again. And we considered actually staying overnight, hiding while security came and then shooting it. But then we realized there'd be no access to the toilet while we were there. So we felt it wouldn't be as romantic a gesture as it sounded. So that's how I made my first film. And I made a feature. And people say, why'd you make a feature? And it's because I didn't know any other thing. And I'm glad I did, because it was a great experience. So when it got to, and then over the years in between then, I did a lot more theatre. So I was back in London, I was doing kind of theatre stuff, and I had a couple of plays on and that kind of thing, while I was also doing my law career at the same time. So when I got to the States, I started getting back into film properly. I wasn't planning to do a short. I was going to go and do a feature. I'd already made a film that seemed to be sufficient for people to feel comfortable to invest in me and to feel confident I could do something. So that was the goal. But life happened, pandemic got in the way. And the funny thing is that when you, slight off topic, but people say to me about how do you but people talk about producing, and And I'm predominantly a writer-director, but I ended up producing a bunch of stuff recently because if you just do it and people see that you do it, then they'll just keep hiring you to do it, essentially. So, the best thing you can do in anything you want to do, in my opinion, is just find the thing you're hoping to do and just start doing it. If you start doing it, it's astonishing how quickly people will assume you have some level of competence at it. And I don't claim to have a clue what I'm doing. I just know I've made so many mistakes over the years that I must know something here and there, but I really just fumble my way through.
So just to clarify something that you said you had a law career for a while, and then so you left that career and now you're just a full-time filmmaker, or like what kind of happened with that?
No, I'm still an attorney at the moment. So
wow.
So I'm still a full-time attorney, which I'm very lucky. I really enjoy being a lawyer. It's a really fun job, and I get to work with great people. I'm very fortunate in that regard. But I also love filmmaking. So at the time being, I've been able to balance the two pretty well. It means your evenings, your weekends, your vacation all gets spent on obviously your passion stuff as opposed to perhaps just sitting around relaxing. But that's fine for me. So I've been very lucky to balance the two so far and just make them work.
Does that help with funding projects? I mean, you've already, in the very short span of time we talked to you, you've talked about turning away funding, having funding for a feature before the pandemic happened. And then it just seems like you have access to people with money. And I'm curious if part of that is running in networks that are not film in addition to being in the film world.
So yeah, a really good question. And it's always that age-old question of how do you get money? And I don't want to pretend that I've cracked the nut. I don't want to pretend that I know exactly what I'm doing or how to do it. I've had some success in that regard. I don't claim to have had any more than that. It has not come from my legal career. Interestingly enough, I keep the two quite separate. So I don't tend to bleed across. Now, there are things about being an attorney that help you as in the creative world. Apart from the else, there's a discipline of being an attorney that really helps in the creative world. And I think that helps people feel confident to invest in you because they take an attitude that says, well, this person's probably a fairly safe pair of hands. As anyone who's out there trying to get money, the worst thing you can possibly do is to be a bit wishy-washy, to be late to meetings, to miss deadlines, to not summarize stuff in a professional manner. You have to convince the person you're talking to that you're going to be a really safe pair of hands for the project, whatever that happens to be. So I think for me, that comes fairly naturally because your role as an attorney is to give your clients confidence in your knowledge and your capability. And I approach things with that kind of diligence to it. One thing in America, which is really interesting to me, is that you see a lot of attorneys go into creative arts. There are so many lawyers who then end up their writers or their showrunners or their directors or film producers. It's a lot of it. And that doesn't hurt. But in the UK, I think there's a slightly older mentality that says, well, if you're in the arts, darling, you should be in the arts. You should be nothing else in your mind. And you must never have studied a thing other than that. Whereas in the States, I was talking to someone and I got told off because I didn't lead with the fact I was an attorney when I was talking to them about a project. And they said to me, you should start with that. I even had a meeting with someone in LA. It was really funny. I just met them randomly, had a coffee. It was a really nice person, great meeting. At the end of it, they said, I'm going to connect you with these people. I think you should talk to them. And I said, well, do you want to see some samples of my work though to know if I've been talking a good game, but it could all be BS. And they just said to me, look, you pass a New York bar. I'm pretty sure you can handle a meeting with a couple of my friends. And so maybe my work is terrible. Maybe it's awful, but it just goes to show if you can project not confidence in yourself, but if you can win the confidence of whoever you're speaking to, that's the harder part of it. That doesn't mean to say you can't ruin it at the next step. It doesn't mean they can't read your script and hate it. It doesn't mean they can't think your work is rubbish or you're terrible, but you're never going to get a chance for anyone to even look at what you're doing if you can't present yourself in a way that says, look, you can trust me. I will get you something good at the end of this.
So let's talk about some of your other projects. So you have this other film, The Multi, that you produced. Can you talk about how that came about and did you have to fundraise for that and bring it all together? Were you hired on? What was the relationship there?
Yes, I was hired on. Natasha Offaly, who was one of the actors in Amy Victoria, she is a deaf woman and she came up with a concept. She created this whole project. She came up with the script and a concept and she obtained some grant funding for this film. And then she asked me if I'd be interested in coming on board. And I originally was coming on board as an EP, actually. It's more of an exec producer kind of role to provide some oversight to things rather than sort of managing it all. And there was somebody else was producing it, somebody else who I knew very well and is a very talented producer themselves. That producer had to step away for various reasons. nothing ill will. It was for personal factors that they had at the time. So they stepped away. I sort of then ended up kind of filling the gap to a degree and ended up, producing really as one of the producers on it. So that's what that was. But that was with the majority deaf cast and crew as well. So we also had behind the camera majority deaf team in that, which was a fantastic experience. It was brilliant to work with. They were tremendous. And again, we had these challenges. We managed to squeeze it in between two of the LA County lockdowns. So that was in early 2021. I know, it was just like, well, we were supposed to shoot it earlier, and then like kind of things got tightened, and then it got reopened just enough, and we were like, run, dive now. Can everyone do it? Everyone can do it. Like, great, let's just everyone's got a free weekend, shoot it. So we shot it in 2 days. Phenomenal crew on set, and due to the lockdown, then a bunch of us weren't there. The director, myself, script supervisor, the ASL interpreters, we were all remote. So we had this sort of big TV set up on the set with the Zoom running with all of us on it. The interpreters were interpreting tirelessly throughout the entire shoot to keep everything going. And again, it was a lot of communication, a lot of careful thing. But when everyone believes in what they're doing and everyone's having a good time doing it, it's amazing how the obstacles just fall away.
Well, let's talk about accolades. So that went to Slam Dance, and then you're also an Emmy nominee for something else. So tell us how that happened.
I am. So I'm an Emmy nominee. Well, first of all, yes. So the multi went to Slam Dance. You're absolutely right, which was a tremendous privilege to go to. And that's just such a brilliant festival. So that was great. The Emmy was actually for unscripted. So the reason I got back into film as opposed to theatre, which I'd been doing more of, was that when I moved to DC with my legal work, I became friends with a guy called Paul Wharton. Paul Wharton is the most fabulous individual you will ever meet. He is this glorious, gorgeous, tall, long-haired, fabulous sort of ball of wonderfulness. And he's brilliant. We became friends just randomly. He's a sweet, sweet guy. He's been on reality TV. He's been in front of the camera, behind the camera as a producer on unscripted shows and things. Done tons of stuff over the years. He still appears on TV a lot now. And he's worked with MTV, with VH1, with Fox 5, with all sorts of different networks. So when we both realized that we both actually work in this kind of area, this space together, we started off developing a narrative show, which we're actually pitching it at the moment. So we've got a few people that are very interested in it. So hopefully that'll get developed actually as a scripted series in the next couple of years. But from that, he was doing a holiday special with Patti LaBelle. He was kind enough to ask me if I would come on and produce it with him. So I did. So I joined as a producer, and we did that, and we got nominated for an Emmy for it in the end, which is just extraordinary as a thing to do. So it was tremendous fun, and he's always a pleasure. He was a producer on Amy Victoria, in fact. We worked together ever since.
What did you think about producing a film remotely like that, where you're not on set and watching the director direct remotely in that way? And do you feel like that is something you would do again, or something that you would recommend for future projects? Or do you feel like that's only something that we should be doing if there are absolutely zero other options to get, the creatives to set to actually direct and produce the project?
Absolutely. The best way to shoot a film is always going to be on set physically. I mean, just without question. You can move faster, the communication's better, you're going to have that. There's no question that's the case. In these kind of circumstances, I'm glad we were able to create, because we couldn't have done using the traditional model. It simply wasn't possible. Incorporating elements of that work very well. So I don't think everybody has to be on set necessarily. It's great if everybody can be, because you also build that sort of that community spirit and that familial thing around it. But even if they're not, you'll still build that to a degree, and you don't need to have everybody physically on set. So if your budget's too tight to have people flying in, or to have accommodation for stuff or things like this, we're still at a time of the pandemic where you're having to do testing. There are still a lot of rules around things. COVID hasn't gone away. It's eased, but it hasn't disappeared. So in those cases, I would say to people, you don't need everybody on set at the time. If you can limit it, if you need to limit your numbers, you can do that. You need to be a bit smart about how you do it. You need to make sure you've got really good Wi-Fi connection at both ends, and you have stuff set up. But you can absolutely have certain key roles. I mean, script supervisor is one of the most important roles, in my opinion, on a film set. It gets totally underrated, never gets the credit that it deserves. But they don't have to be physically on set to do their job. They can actually do it very effectively remotely if you have everything geared up in that way. And similarly, there are other roles like that. The place where I think the remote thing really, really should be utilized more is post-production and pre-production. post-production. We do not need to have the level of physical meetings that go on right now. You don't need to have everyone physically in a small office the whole way through pre-production. And in post-production, you absolutely do not need to have the director sat there in the room for 8 hours, sweating over the shoulder of the poor editor. Doing stuff, it's just not necessary to do it. You can find ways to do it. It's more efficient. It's better to do it in that way.
I want to disagree. Wait, Alrik, are you going to agree? You're going to agree.
I'm going to agree because I guess it's a little different. So I work at a company where I post-produce these like long-form corporate videos, and we do everything remotely. And like that's I'm a post-producer, so my whole job is to manage the team and make sure that like everything is happening properly. And no one's in person ever. It's all remote, and it works fucking great. But I don't know how I would like if I had to do that with my own movie. I don't know if I would agree, but having said that, like I basically did. Like I had color was remote, sound was remote on my feature. Like we did everything remote, and I wish I could have been in the room for the color session and for the sound session. I think that would have been great. But the movie's great. I love it. So I don't know. But hey, Liz, talk. I want to hear your side of it.
Well, I had a session with my composer this morning. We're about to lock music, and I just really wanted to be in a room being like, what if you tried this? Like so badly. But that's a minor concession. And like, safety is first. Safety is most important. But I think there are moments where you can really explore in person, and that momentum is lost when you're in that remote world where you don't want to ask someone to listen to something through Zoom audio or look at it through their, MacBook Air monitor. And I think there's an awkwardness there. That's all.
No, in person is always going to be the most effective way to make anything, to do anything, in not just in filmmaking, but in the corporate world, in the personal world. Nothing is ever going to beat that for physical interaction. I think for when your budget is tight, when your time is limited, when you're trying to juggle these things, and particularly in post-production where, post-production, you're paying the editor, you're paying the colorist, you're paying the composer. The time you're spending physically in the room with them is hour blocks of cash that you're having to spend on that. Whereas if you can do it virtually, they can probably get a lot more done for your money in that time. And then you look at it. So, when, a lot of my editing through this entire process, so we did the series, we did the film. I then got hired to produce a set of 3 short films by Samir Gardezi of Break the Room. And Samir is a wonderful guy. He's just wrote and got nominated for an NAACP Image Award for writing Hot Mess Holiday, which is pretty much the first kind of brown holiday movie, or one of the very few brown holiday movies out there. It's on Comedy Central. He's a really sweet guy. And he brought me in to do it because they had money to shoot these 3 films, but they needed them to be done and out by the election in November 2020. And so they had a tiny window to do it. And he had seen what we did with The Myth of Control. And he was like, look, could you do that for this? So we did. And again, with that, we had the same process. We're going through the editing. So I've now been able to do remote post-production process on the equivalent of about 12, maybe 13 short films in equivalent on it. And while it would be wonderful to be in the same room each time, in terms of time, the ability for them to go through, send it over, for the director and the producer to make detailed notes in an organized and structured way, for them to implement that and come back and forth. I think it worked very well. But I'm not going to take away from you, Liz. Yeah, absolutely right. If you can be there, physically there, and have, if you've got the budget and you've got the time to go and have all of that extra camaraderie, and also the time where you're sitting there and then the two of you are just kind of chatting randomly and then brilliant ideas spark out of nowhere, all that stuff is glorious. It's wonderful to do. It is just when you can watch your bundles of cash burning in the corner as you're doing it.
I get that. And also it struck me listening to you that there really is a theme of this specific interview, or this episode, so to speak. It's like making things with restrictions. Like, I think the first feature, the restriction was actually was ignorance, not knowing exactly. And then you have the COVID movies, you have the ASL short. I mean, there are restrictions to communication, there are barriers to transportation. This is I hope I'm not giving you like a massive question to answer. it's either like, what is the takeaway from all those restrictions, or like, what is the number one thing you're going to protect as soon as you're let loose to make something exactly the way you want with no restrictions?
Absolutely. So on the question of restrictions, everyone's got a restriction. Like the guys who made the Russo brothers, who made Avengers Endgame, had a budget of something like $320 million. Maybe not, but I would all but guarantee that they would have loved to have had another $5 million to do certain things. I almost guarantee there were bits they're like, oh, if we could have only just done that. You will never have enough of anything realistically as a filmmaker, because the bigger your options are, the bigger your creative vision gets. That's what you get. So restrictions are not a bad thing. I think they're a friend. If you take them and don't worry about what you can't do, but simply focus on what you can do and what you've got available to hand. And as long as you just say, well, it's not about I want to do this, but I can't do it. Just going to be, well, what can I do with what I've got? And then you'll get it made. And once you've got it made, it's always, when we were doing, go too much off tangent on it, but coming back to this point of restrictions, the majority of films never get made. The majority of films, whether it's an idea or a script or even pre-production or even sometimes in production. And I know films, I mean, you guys will know this as well, the number of filmmakers that actually make their film and then the post-production never quite seems to get finished, or it takes 2 years or something. It's tragic to watch and doing that. So I always say to people, if you actually make it and finish the film, the odds of that film never getting made are much greater than you making it and it being shit. If you make it, it's probably going to be good. So, don't worry about it. Don't worry about, but we couldn't get that shot, or I couldn't do this or something. When I watch all my films back, which I do every night, obviously, while I'm sitting in a smoking jacket with a cigar. No, which I literally never do unless you're at a festival and they're on a screen. And when I do, I'm cringing the whole way through. Not because I'm like, oh, why didn't we do that? I'm like, because I remember all the stuff we couldn't shoot that. I know we couldn't have that. It would have been better if I had that. That's how I feel about all my films, which most filmmakers do. That doesn't matter. When you're shooting it, you have to just be, what have we got and what can I do, and get it made. If you get it made, it's going to be good. Very rarely do people make a film where they've really put their heart and they've paid attention to it. It's just terrible. So I think that's the first thing. And in terms of what will I not let go of when the day that I get the big bucket of money and I can do whatever I want and go crazy, the main thing I won't do is lose sight of post-production and the importance of that, and also lose sight of the marketing and the end goal behind it. Well, I make films and I make plays and I make projects for an audience to enjoy. Because when I go to see anything or I read something, I want to enjoy it as an audience member. I'm not making it for me. I'm making it for somebody else to see it. I never want to be too self-indulgent with what I'm doing in that. I want to make sure it doesn't have to be spoon-fed to people, but that it's enjoyable for them to watch. So I never want to lose sight of that. Never going to lose sight of the fact that, as you're making it, you need to think about how you're going to market it. So what is it going to be marketed for? Who's it going to be marketed to? That kind of target, what are you going to do for it at the end? And the post-production is really so critical. It just doesn't get the credit that it deserves most of the time. And so much of a movie, the old phrase that you make 3 films, the one you write, the one you shoot, and the one you edit. But the one you edit is the last one that you make. So really getting together with the post-production early, making sure I've got them on board, making sure that they are comfortable with what we're doing, that they're engaged, and we can work with them in that way is going to be, I think, a key thing that I'll try not to lose. Or maybe I'll go mad. Maybe I'll just go crazy and I'll basically I'll go like, kind of an old school, like Days of Thunder, the way they just like blew all their money, rolled around, Scrooge McDuck, just pile it into a room and dive into it, something like that. Maybe I'll just do that. It'll be one film, the only film I ever make in my career, but it'll be glorious.
So I know we're short of time, but I gotta ask about Good Girls Get Fed, because I'm actually one of your crowdfunding supporters.
Oh my God, that's amazing!
I'm friends with Kelly Lou Dennis. She's an amazing actor and now director. And so when I heard that she was making her first movie, I was like, I have to support her. So I'm just curious, like, how did you get involved with the project? Like, what were your intentions with the movie? I just want to hear a little bit about this short film.
Oh, I had no idea already. We should have just been talking about that the whole time. Yeah, that's great. Kelly Lou Dennis is absolutely amazing. She is one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And the best thing about her is she does not realize that she is one of the most brilliant people you're ever going to meet, which is fantastic, because otherwise she'd probably be unworkable with. I was in a Clubhouse room. For anyone who doesn't know, the Clubhouse app is like a social media app, but everything is audio. So you have these audio rooms where you can sit there and just chat and things. And during the pandemic, it was a great source of things when you couldn't meet people. So I met a lot of cool people. I was in a Clubhouse room and I was when about to speak, and I believe I was extolling the virtue that my biggest piece of advice to everyone was to don't be a wanker, because that it's a small industry, and the best thing you can do is just try not to be a wanker in all situations, and then you'll probably be all right. And Kelly obviously went and thought, this guy seems like a moron, but let's just talk to him anyway. So she reached out to me and we had a Zoom call and got on very well. She sent me the script for Good Girls Get Fed, which I just blew my mind. I loved it. And I was like, Kelly, this isn't a short film. This isn't even just a feature. It's a franchise. This is a brilliant, brilliant script. It's very, very well written. So she's a great actress, very talented, but she's also a fantastic writer. And she very, very kindly, and some might say foolishly, invited me to come on as a producer for the project. So I did. And we had part of the money from other sources, and then we crowdfunded. It was just the first Seed and Spark campaign that I'd ever been part of. It went incredibly well. We exceeded the target that we had, in large part due to Kelly's very, very impressive sort of work building it. Also the whole team behind it. We've got a fantastic team. The film itself is female-led, so it's a majority female crew, majority female cast. I'm the only guy in the entire, in the main producing team, definitely. And we just wrapped about 3 or 4 weeks ago over in LA. And Alrik, thank you for donating and contributing to it. Really appreciate that. It's been a great experience.
Of course, my pleasure. Gotta put my money where my mouth is, because I got lots of support on my Seed and Spark campaign. So when someone who I respect and who I think is just a really talented person is doing something, I always try to help out when I can. Plus, the imagery got me right away, and then Kelly wrote me personally to let me know about the crowdfunding campaigns. She just did everything perfectly. She was amazing. She did a fantastic job.
She is fantastic. I have said to Kelly that this is probably the least amount of work. I've never felt more, frankly, pointless on a project than I did on this film, because everything that I'd be like, we need to do this, and she's already, yeah, sure, of course, we'll have done it already. So brilliant.
We are running a little late, so I was thinking, with everyone's permission, we turn this into a rapid fire final 6 questions.
Let's do it.
Go for it.
First question. What's the first film you made, and how do you feel about it now?
The Party. I'm pleased that I made it. I don't ever want to watch it again.
What's the best filmmaking advice you've ever received?
Just get it made.
What's the worst filmmaking advice you've ever received?
Quotes. I've spotted a typo on page 3. I know it's only your first draft, but maybe you should fix that. Anybody ever goes and does that to you, never go back to the advice.
I've done that to so many people. I am the worst. I have done that to everyone. I am apologizing for my actions, but yes, go on.
Do you have a goal as a filmmaker?
Yeah, to make bigger and better movies, but predominantly to bring in underrepresented voices, to promote diversity within the work that I do, but in a way that is still commercially accessible. If you could go back in time, what's the piece of advice you would give yourself? Don't worry about the outcome.
And last question, is making movies hard?
Good God, yes. It's really, really hard. I love it. If you've had people that said it isn't, then wonderful. I'm so pleased for them, honestly. But it's just hard for me.
Like 4 people.
I'm glad it's not just, no, Mikail, you suck. Everyone else finds it really easy. Yeah. And Liz, I apologize. I'm sure your advice is very helpful.
No, it's bad. I give bad. That's why I tell people I don't want to read their script, because I will just give them feedback that is unhelpful. Like there's a typo on page 4. I will, because in lieu of anything else to say, I'll be like, I know how to spell things. That's all I can provide. Please sell your wares. Tell people how they could support you best. Is it Twitter? Is it email? Is it renting your work? Tell them.
Yeah, so you can see me on Instagram. My handle is at midnightcaller ___. It's a random. It's my old music handle, and I haven't worked out how to change it on Instagram because I'm a dinosaur. I'm on Twitter as well at Mikail Chowdhury. You can reach me on there, see all the projects on there. In terms of supporting me, the stuff isn't out there at the moment because we're still on festival circuits, and also we're still selling it. We haven't made it publicly available. But if you follow me on Instagram and there are festival events going, please do follow those to see that. And anybody that wants to collaborate, I always just love talking to other people that are interested in doing stuff and meeting, happy to work on other things. So feel free to reach out.
Liz, what do you remember about our talk with Mikail?
So little do I remember. It was months ago. It was 4 months ago. My gosh. Thank you.
Or 3.
3 months ago. That is like an eternity in post 2020. That's like that's a long time. I do remember he was sweet, kind, charming. I remember there was like a sarcastic back and forth between us. And then I don't know, I haven't listened to the show for a while, but like, I think he like poked fun at, we asked him like, what's sort of worst advice you've ever gotten? And I remember there's like a nice little exchange between us at that moment. And he just became very clear that he's a very sweet man. And that is literally all I remember about the conversation, was like a nice little back and forth on that one question.
I remember going into this being like, okay, this guy is like a writer and a producer, but mainly like I kind of thought of him more as like a producer guest, and that he was coming in to talk about like how he picks projects to produce. And then there was like a whole story about like him writing his first feature and like gearing up to make his first movie,
right,
and then it falling apart, and like all this money that he had like lined up to make the movie, and then all kind of going away, and then focusing on this other stuff like as a producer, as a writer, and that like he gets a lot of joy out of like collaborating on projects with people, and like being this kind of person who is just making things like on the side of their day job, and like how he gets so much fulfillment.
That's right. He's a lawyer. He was a lawyer. That's right. Now it's all coming back.
Yeah, and like it's like he just does this because he loves it and it's fun for him, and he seemed to get so much pleasure from the work he was doing in filmmaking. Yeah. And I thought that really struck a chord with me, that he was just really enjoying all the things that we do as filmmakers, and that he really liked to support other filmmakers and other projects. And that like, that was why he produced, was because he wanted to help other people make their things. I also remember that he was a producer on this short film that I was a backer of, Good Girls Get Fed. Kelly Lou Dennis is the writer, director, and star of that short film. And she's just an amazing person. Was a Bay Area actor, moved to Los Angeles a few years ago, but yeah, really cool person. So like knowing that, he worked with Kelly, I was like, oh my God, like such a cool connection there. And like, it was nice I wish we had time to talk more about that project, because like that one sounds like a really fun one. But yeah, no, I just remember it was a great conversation. And I really had I have fun talking to all our guests, but I just remember walking away from that conversation just like with a smile on my face, just being like, that was really fun.
Well, we have to thank Sana Soni, formerly of 1091. Currently, I don't know if I could say what her current employment is. It's an exciting move, but she was a former guest of the show and she recommended Mikail. So Mikail.
Nice.
Well, in additional news, we're here to talk about a new segment. We have an article about digital creators being hesitant to break into Hollywood, and it's written by J. Clara Chan of The Hollywood Reporter. So the content of the article is that it talks a little bit about the creative control online creators lose when they start entering the traditional studio executive noting content to death system, as I like to call it, but also the double-edged sword of many creators going into online content in order to break into the established media landscape. Pretty interesting article, thanks to the curation of our producer, Eric. Alrik, what do you think?
Yeah, I kind of think this is a big problem, that people want to go into Hollywood thinking that they should have creative control as a first-time filmmaker, or like, going from a background to like, yes, I am so great, I should be able to do whatever I want and no one should ever tell me anything, and I should never take any notes from anyone because I am a god boy or god girl and I'm the god artist creator. Bow down to me as your queen or king or whatever. Like, that's total bullshit. It's so bullshit. It makes my head hurt. And like, I feel like one of the big problems that we've been having in like the Netflix era is that they do give full creative control to their filmmakers, and it usually turns out pretty bad. Like it's not good. You give a great artist who's used to getting notes and having to make compromises and concessions, and like by that whittling down and like putting that effort into like really chiseling the movie into like being a great movie, and like having to take on those notes, take on another perspective, I think is what creates great things. But in this era, like no one's giving notes to anybody ever. They're just doing whatever the fuck they want. And I don't like it. I think it mostly turns out really, really bad movies that are just like way too long, way too many character side stories, that they just don't have like the gravitas or weight of a movie from like the older days. you know? And so I just feel like, I think notes are important. I think like, you know, I don't really know how Apple is doing their system, how they're running their studio or whatever, but like, it feels like they're following like a traditional studio pattern where they're actually like holding their filmmakers accountable and like going through a process where they're not just like letting them run rampant as these little like, you know, auteurs like running a whole series and just doing whatever they want. Because everything I've watched on Apple for the most part has been great, you know, and I just think that, I don't know, they must be doing something differently than like the Netflixes or even the Amazons of the world that are just like, okay, you know, madam or sir creator, like you are all knowing and all wise. Go off and make your movie. Take all the money you need. Don't ever worry about budgets. Don't ever worry about anything. Just do whatever you want. It's like, I think that's a terrible, terrible way to make art. And so this idea that they like, these digital creators are like, oh, I have to, you know, take away my creative control. It's like, yeah, maybe you should have your creative control taken away. Maybe it is good to like have to like, you know, answer some notes and address some concerns from other people. Maybe you aren't like the genius that you think you are. So that's my takeaway. Completely off off the grid. But yeah, that's what I took away from reading this article. Have you been following the rise and fall of Taika Waititi as of late? Not really. Like no. It was like everyone's obsessed with Taika Waititi for years, right? Like we all love him. I still love him. But then all of a sudden this like Twitter backlash has been percolating, and he made some comment about how director's cuts are always bloated and way too long, and they're not good. And like the internet got really angry at him, and now all of a sudden it's like Taika can do wrong. It's very interesting. He's right. He's right. Director cuts are not better. James Cameron's director's cut of Aliens is not better. Wait, but I think Abyss director's cut is better from what I remember. Oh, I guess I wasn't thinking of Aliens as much as Terminator 2. The Terminator 2 cut is the one that I always watch the original. I don't watch the director's cut because it's just like it's longer, it's slower. There are some exceptions where the director's cut is better. I think there's some exceptions, right? Maybe. I didn't think of it from the perspective that you came at it. I came at it from like a filmmaker being forced to cast influencers for some reason. Like I kept thinking about the commercial value of influencers as I read that article, and I was thinking about like the positives, right? Like people who came from the YouTube world, like Rachel Zegler or even like a Justin Bieber, say what you will. Like he's a great singer. Like he may be an annoying figure, but he's a great singer. And there are these people who come out of what seems like a more democratic system of art making, like just creating a YouTube channel and gathering followers. But then you have someone like Spielberg saying like, I have an open casting call. And then you find someone with like Rachel Zegler who has like millions of followers, right? It's like, it's not about democracy or meritocracy. It's still about who can sell me the most amount of tickets for my movie. And I was thinking about, you know, there was a remake of Valley Girl a few years ago where Logan Paul was cast in that. And then you think about, I had a friend whose producers encouraged her to cast an influencer in her first feature. And that's what's annoying is like, oh, let's use online creators as stunt casting for our films. Like that, right. That bothers me a lot. But I do actually, I don't know, I do think there are way too many cooks in a art kitchen sometimes. And I don't love the way the Hollywood system works. And I would like creators to have more creative freedom. But as long as they're being held, as long as they can explain why they're doing what they're doing, right? As long as the studio executives are like, I have a note. And then the director goes, here's why I did this. And as long as they have an argument for why they did it, I'm on board. I want to give them that freedom. I guess too much freedom is bad, though. I think. I think like, yeah, you should be able to answer for your creative decisions, you know, and you should be able to answer for why this is really important to do it this way. Yeah. But like, you know, when you come out with like a over 4 hour long gangster movie that doesn't need to be 4 hours long, it's like stupid. Like you're never going to make a movie as good as, you know, any of the old, you know, Scorsese movies, Departed, whatever. Like Departed to me is like the last great Scorsese movie. There's no more good Scorsese movies after The Departed. Whoa. Underline. I mean, The Irishman is... Irishman's fine. Whatever.
It's a good movie.
It's good. It's not great. It's not a classic. It's not like
I'm pulling up IMDb.
Iconic. Yeah. What else?
I used to be like the world's biggest Martin Scorsese fan.
I love Scorsese.
I had like a cake of his face for my birthday. Like I met him and I got to shake his hand and I still feel the softness of his hand on my hand. But he's like one of the reasons why I wanted to be a filmmaker.
Yeah. I mean, Wolf of Wall Street's a fun movie, I think. I'm glad that movie exists.
Yeah.
I just feel like The Irishman was supposed to be like his great like opus, like his return to this genre that he like has made like the best movies in the genre. And it was just like a paled in comparison to his previous work. And almost mainly because it was too long. Like if it had been shorter, it would have been so much better.
I didn't think it was too long. I did
really?
Not. Yeah.
Really?
I will give Scorsese every indulgence, though. I really will. I'm very biased.
You and everyone else, apparently.
Yeah, I will.
Tarantino too. Oh man.
Feel the same way about Tarantino. I feel the same way about like art house European directors who just like show me like a clear glass bottle for 3 hours. Like I'll be like, yes, I will get something from this moment from you. So I'm more on the fence I'm on the other side of the fence from you, I think, on this one.
Sounds like it. I don't want to watch a bottle of clear painted glass for 3 minutes. I get so frustrated. Like if a shot is too long and like it's not telling me anything that I need to know and it's not beautiful enough, I'm bored. Like either it has to be the most amazing, beautiful thing in the whole world or communicating really important either character or story, information. If it's not doing one of those three things, it's fucking bullshit, wasting my time. Like I don't want to watch a shot that's like 5 seconds too long if it's not fulfilling one of those three, things.
What about when Richard Leeds was on the show and he talked about the slowness and the fact that certain art house films require active observers, right? Like a patient, someone putting things together, not having it spoon fed to them.
That I like. I'm okay with that, but I just feel like that's not always what's happening, in the instances I'm referring to. I don't think we have time to talk about this other thing. We've talked too much already.
We're good.
Liz, you want to take us out?
Yeah. You can always send us a question, comment, or suggestion to podcast@makingmoviesishard.com. If you like the show, you can leave us a review on iTunes. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at MMIH Podcast, and YouTube at Making Movies is Hard Podcast. I'm going to stop this blurb for 1 second with a sincere request. If you listen to the show and you have not written in or interacted with us on social media or email or anything, please do. We're trying to get in touch with more listeners. And for a while, it's been the same smattering of usual suspects who are lovely and we adore them. But we're trying to figure out who else listens. So please reach out. And that's podcast@makingmoviesishard.com. We also want to shout out the International Screenwriters Association, an organization designed to connect writers with filmmakers through the programs they offer. www.networkisa.org to benefit from the smattering of services they offer. Thanks to Mikail Chowdhury for coming on the show. Thanks to our editor, Jeff Freimuth, for doing the editing. Thanks to Sana Soni for connecting us to Mikail. And thanks to our producer, Eric Toms, for being awesome. Thanks to all of you for listening. Talk to you next week.
One of the things that you could have no expectations in, or maybe low expectations in, is joining our Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/MMIH podcast. I don't know. Is that bad? Is that a terrible segue?
It's like, no one's making money, but you could give us money. Like that's what I'm reading.